Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us for this session designed to address the regions. It's a topical topic. It's been the case for many years in France. Great panelists. First, Gregoire SENTILHES, President of French Association of Investors in Capital, a member of France Investissement, is the founding president of Next Stage AM, one of the pioneers in capital development. Moreover, he's authored a book, Long Live Industrial Growth. It's about questions and issues that we'll be covering today. Then we have Stéphane PALLEZ, CEO of La Française des Jeux, the first network of local distribution network in France. Lots of issues having to do with regions. He spent some time in the public sector at the Treasury Division at the Ministry of Economy and Finance as well. And he was close to the French authorities, and he was a counselor, an advisor to many ministries. Marie-Ange DEBON from Kearlis, chair of a board with different positions, international companies, international companies. She is the vice president of International MEDEF and president of UTP, the French Transportation Union. A lot of experience in the structure of regions. Sophie, CEO of Corian, a group specializing in care, a group present in France. She is also the president of the Corian Foundation. It was a unit that was created in order to focus on aging populations. And what is important as well is to consider the geographical areas. She worked for SNCF, and I think that she managed to garner a lot of experience across France. Laurent GERMAin, CEO of Aegis, an engineering company with different businesses, infrastructures, facilities, transportation, water, businesses as well. And he started his career in the public service. He was a public servant with lots of experience in private and public sectors. Like the other panelists, is also the president of the Corporate Council at MEDEF International, a lot of experience in international matters. And Karim El Aynaoui, Policy Center for the New South. You were an economist at the World Bank. You were at the head of economic affairs at the Central Bank of Morocco, and you are the executive president of the New South unit, and you are a dean at the Economic University of Morocco. So we have different panelists. For this session, I will give you some background elements, background information about what we would like to achieve during this session. So, production in France, and like high revenue countries, production is concentrated in metropolises. And at the end of the day, there are regional gaps in terms of employment and jobs. There's a surprising trend, and this gap is bigger than in other neighboring countries. In 2019, in France, before the COVID crisis, there was a 25% gap between the most dynamic region in France and the less dynamic region, a 13-point gap if you consider metropolitan France. So I can tell you that it is a significant gap. And when you have a look at those gaps, there are difficulties in terms of public access, access to health, problems with social mobility. When we look at people at the end of their career, they work in the greater Paris area, and the origin of these individuals is pivotal when it comes to assessing their purchasing power or their income levels. So there are differences. So today we will be touching upon those gaps. What is the origin of these gaps? What is the role of the different stakeholders? So there will be 3 sections as part of this panel discussion. So don't hesitate to put some questions after the presentation given by the different speakers. The first question that I would like to ask to the different panelists: what are the different stakeholders in terms of regions? What is the role of companies versus the role of other stakeholders? Gregoire, go ahead. So, good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be with you. So, in a nutshell, so next stage, we've been investing in equity for companies and small companies, 25,000 employees in France, and there are 3 main ideas that I would like to moot. First idea, so if you take a step back and if we show some foresight, I can tell you that regions have been forgotten over the past 45 years. So the elites forgot about the territories, and they were sidelined in terms of investments, in terms of industrial and economic matters. You may have read Nicolas Dufour's book. Allow me to put things in perspective. Regarding industrial matters, there's a gap of 5 million jobs between France and Germany on the industrial front. But there's something that we know: when a region is losing out in terms of industrial expertise, the region will be stifled gradually. So this is the first idea that I wanted to moot, and this has to do with our responsibilities. The role of small businesses, the role of very small businesses is key in these regions in terms of jobs, in terms of employment, in terms of industrial expertise, and in terms of know-how. Jean-Pierre Raffarin worked on the industrial clusters, competitiveness clusters, but at the end of the day, there were too many of them. But there was a need for creativity. But at the time, we also noticed that we were in a tough situation. When you have a look at the map following the elections that took place, the parliamentary elections, so when you have an economic slump in a region, you can see that the extreme movements gain ground in the light of the situation in the regions and in the peripheral areas. In terms of competitiveness, so we should be back to full employment. The unemployment rate is 7%, but we need to redeploy and diversify our investments in small businesses and very small companies. Life will be back, and public infrastructures will be able to be revitalized. So these are the 3 ideas that I wanted to share with you. Thank you, Gregoire. Stéphane, I'm not going to introduce Française des Jeux. I think that Française des Jeux is a well-known company. This is what I think, but I will be talking about our objectives, what we can do, what we should do. I'm not going to revisit the comments that have been made since the start of the session. We are all convinced that it is pivotal to take action in order to combat what is being called in these studies and surveys a kind of perception. So the social the social aspect and the regional aspect. It's like a double whammy. So there are some people who find it difficult, to move away from their regions, and this is compounded by the regions gaps. So I think that we've identified the political repercussions. So, of course, in France, we will say that the state needs to take that issue on board. The state is doing a lot of things in France. Of course, things could be done better. Public spending is quite high, so it might not be the solution. And when you look at what the citizens said, they expect a lot from companies, and they are right. So companies, businesses, they have a responsibility to shoulder, and I can tell you that we shoulder our responsibilities. So regional CSR, so we should embed regions as part of the CSR policy. So this is our commitment. We have CSR in our commitments. We have CSR in the purpose of a company. So how do we roll out this commitments to regions? First of all, it's a matter of gauging our impact. So Française des Jeux, at Française des Jeux, you have 2,700 employees, but we gauge our impact, we publish our impact, and we maintain 55,000 jobs in France across France. So we are very proud of that. These are not direct jobs, but these jobs are pivotal in terms of employment and jobs. We have a network. What about our network? 30,000 program, the largest regional network, better than La Poste and other companies, and we have a good relationship with that network. We don't deal with economic matters only with this network. We have some points of sales across France, and we also span rural networks. The business model in rural areas is different to that of city centers or peri-urban areas. So we invest in those points of sale. We create new services with tobacconists, and on the basis of the call for bids that we manage to get, we have a local payment structure being used in 13,000 sales points. If this network is to continue to work, there should be new services. It's a matter of diversification. With this network, we are doing lots of other things, and I will mention two examples. For example, in these points of sale, we can forge bonds, and we can curb the digital divide. So we will fetch people, we will train people so that they can get access to public services and to all the digital services. And I could talk about heritage assets, and this is a driver. When you collect 100 million in order to restore 650 monuments, there's a kind of domino effect in terms of social, economic, and political dimensions. So people will be proud of living in a specific region thanks to the services that we deliver. Gregoire, you wanted to chip in? That's quite impressive. Stéphane has mentioned the 30,000 points of sale. So in the regions, it's a source of hope. And these points of sale are pivotal, but they will be efficient if there are some private and industrial jobs in those regions. And that's quite striking when you go to Vendée, Département, when you go to other regions, when the industrial regions are buoyant. People feel proud. Otherwise, there's a sense of despair if you don't have all these jobs. Sophie, you seem to be worried. Do you want to chip in? Yeah, I do concur with what Gregoire has just said. So if you want to get some momentum in some regions, you need to get some labor pools, and the economic activities should enable people to live well in a dignified fashion. And then you will get an ecosystem of services that will follow suit. Back to the role of a state. Is the state the main stakeholder? Should the state follow in the footsteps of companies? So Gregoire, you are founding lots of companies. I will be a bit provocative. I would say that the state has done a good job in the regions, but the state is the last bulwark. Most of the time, those who haven't done their job were those who were in charge of managing the whole system. Banks are present in regions, but they don't finance quite a lot. I mean, they finance high street operations most of the time. So allow me to put things in perspective. Remember, a book was written 10 years ago, The Flight of the Creative Class. So at the end of the day, the elites committed themselves. Remember the Golden City comic strip? So they were involved in big conurbations. After COVID, regions have regained a role in economic terms. But what is important is to invest in regions. Laurent, do you want to chip in? Yes. There are 3 examples of public policies that have compounded the region's gaps. Competitiveness clusters. The objective was to beef up the economic potential of big metropolises, especially the 10 global metropolises. And lots of skilled people were attracted to these competitiveness clusters. But I can tell you that the gap between regions has increased. Then transportation networks, you have a star-shaped network, and in fact public money was not allotted in a balanced way. And then you have lots of administrative dimensions. You have lots of co-funding projects, and metropolises can fund these projects. Regions that have money can fund these projects. So the administrative structure in France will compound the gaps in regions. Second question that I would like to put to you: the companies, businesses have a fundamental role, but what kind of role they can have in the regions? Marie-Ange, go ahead. So I do agree with Keolis. So we have a twofold role in the regions. We are a big employer. Keolis, 30,000 employees in France. So if you have a look at our positions, we are present in the metro network, in the bus network, in the train networks, and these jobs cannot be offshored. And we can welcome people who haven't followed an academic background. So we train people, we recruit on a permanent basis. So at Keolis, we can be instrumental in the creation of an ecosystem. There's another dimension as well. As Laurent said, transportation is key. A region can have lots of activities if the transportation network works. So transportation plays a key role because you have some areas that are landlocked, and if you have a good transportation network, you can curb this phenomenon. You have also lots of traffic jams, and without a good transportation system, you can't get a job. So we've conducted some surveys whereby 50% of people looking for a job gave up a job because there was not a transportation network that was available. So the transport network is key. The most virtuous transportation system is the public transport system. It is quite affordable. So it's important to have some infrastructures and facilities that will alleviate congestion, traffic jams, especially if a region is to develop itself. So Achilles plays a key role in the economic activities, and we have a versatile approach, nurturing professional mobility. So what is important for people is to get different career paths, and that's possible through the transportation system. So I can tell you that this is a tool that we can't do without. So in the past, France was centralized, but now we have a more decentralized pattern. But the state is still involved with some funding, and the regulatory framework is key if you want the transportation system to further. We know that transportation offer will create demand. So it's important to have the supply side. So in the most peripheral areas, it is said that people should give up their cars, but you need to get a transportation system. But for some people who have 2 cars or 1 car, and there are many of these people, but in Paris it's different. In the regions, we should enable people to give up the use of our cars. Transportation is important, and health as well. Sophie, back to your question, what is the role of companies and business in the regions? Regarding my company, there's a threefold objective to provide an essential service: health, medical services, and we have to make sure that people can stay at home when they are ill. And this is the very nature of our business activity. We need to be an employer, but we need to train our employees, and we need to focus on the local ecosystem. And there's a third role. We want to make sure that the local economy thrives. And we have lots of SMEs in Korea, 25,000 people, 400 health structures specialized in old people's homes, home care services, a raft of activities designed to protect fragile people, to help patients suffering from chronic diseases. And we focus on rural areas, on constituencies in Paris, and we want to make sure that we can provide the essential services of life. And we want to make sure that people stay at home when they are sick. So we have health professionals, nurses, doctors, physicians who are present, and they support people when it comes to old age. 50% of doctors will stop working in the next decade. And it takes 10 years to train doctors. So in the next 10 years, we will be suffering from a shortage of doctors and physicians. So our organization should be very agile. So we have a key role to play in terms of health, in terms of transportations, in terms of food, and the companies and businesses have a role to play. So we need to employ and we need to train people. We made a commitment. We want to focus on work-study programs. We are targeting young people or seasoned employees who want to get a higher qualification level. But we also employ lots of health professionals on training schemes. So 50,000 young people will go on a training scheme in a social unit, in a medical unit. So we are an entry point, I mean, for the young people who live around, and that's a key, and it is in line with the CSR dimension. We have a responsibility. Basically, we deliver some services on a local basis. So we want to be in a position to buy 70%. So food, different equipment, construction, services. We want to buy them locally, and the figure today is 80%. And I can tell you that this is a meaningful approach because we are a driving force, and local economic driving force. And you have to consider the current international situation. So we are quite legitimate. Where do we buy? Where do we get our products? Who I will work with? A local baker or a remote producer? Who will work with me? The local plant. And the local plant will supply different products, hygiene products. So this is key. So I think that we need to think about the different sectors. We need to ponder over the local sectors. So CSR is a key. And this is a dimension that we need to embed in our policies, in the commitments that we made. And this is the trajectory that we've embarked upon. So thank you. A few reactions from our panelists. So Marie-Ange said that we need local transportation systems that are swift, efficient, efficacious. I will give you an example. Between Rennes and Saint-Malo, 70 kilometers. So it will take 50 minutes. I mean, 85 kilometers per hour. So speed is key, especially between your place of residence and the place of work. And it's a key decision when people want to move into a region, and this dimension should be taken into account. Marianne, so 20% of trips are between your home and the place of work. So you have differing needs in terms of trips. You have different reasons, social, leisure, education, dimensions. So transportation is key if you want to go from your home to the workplace and vice versa. But the ecosystem of a region will work with a good transportation system. Of course, there are some daily trips. For example, I mean, you came from Paris in order to take part in those sessions. So this is not included. This is not included. So 190,000 trips and professional trips account for 20%. Any reactions from the panelists?
So we're going to move on to the third question. Laurent, I'm going to let you begin. We're going to perhaps ask broader questions. The role of the environment, or the importance of the environment in these local area related questions. So what about experience elsewhere? The international scene, for example, or what happens in other countries? So if we look at things from an international point of view and we think about 2050, the trends are going to grow. The population will increase by over 2 billion. Where is the population going to go? It's going to go in the main urban centers because the rate of urban development will go from 50 to 75%. So the challenge is huge if we don't do anything about it. First of all, the local area divide will be accentuated, and then there will be the carbon question that will become worse because most carbon emissions are in cities. So what do we do about this? Well, in cities, we need to continue to make transport more fluid, but we need to offer services as well that make it possible to reduce emissions. This is what Aegis is doing in many services, the technology for smart parking, no emissions zones, for example, for lower carbon transport. So at world level, there are three main things. First of all, we need to work on digital networks. To reduce the local area divide, we need to use digital networks, especially the 4G network. When we compare things across the world, Germany won 6 billion euros, 5 billion were recycled to cover rural areas that weren't very well covered by the 5G network. That's creative, and that's why companies set up or stay in local areas, in rural local areas. The second aspect concerns transport, fast daily transport between average-sized cities. And there, the example is the north of Italy, where, thanks to the Pendolino, the travel times between small and medium-sized cities has been reduced. People, therefore, don't necessarily set up shop in big metropolises. And the third aspect, when we think about electric charging stations, we mustn't forget about rural areas. Otherwise, the qualified populations who can buy electric vehicles will stay in big cities because the transport infrastructure will be better adapted to their individual choices. Thank you very much. Karim, give us a different point of view. Hello, everybody. Very happy to be with you. I would like to start with the starting point. If we're talking about this subject, it's because there's a problem to begin with. And fundamentally, it's a question. It's a political question. We've got very centralized states versus periphery. France is a specific case. Not all countries are centralized countries. It really depends on history. We have an interesting history in Morocco. We were extremely decentralized. We became decentralized during colonialization, with the state being built on a French model. So it's interesting to see that that's not the way things are in every country. And this relationship between the center and the peripheral area and the individual problems that this creates. You know, you're always less important if you're in the periphery rather than in the center. That is what the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest movement, was all about. So I think right from the beginning we need to integrate this political dimension. It's not, you know, the RIC is not enough. Minimum incomes are not enough. So the second point is linked to the culture of change. The organizers of this event are inviting us to think about transformations. And I think there's a very deep-reaching transformation underway, notably among young people. Young people are comfortable in distributed organizations rather than centralized organizations. This can be seen at different levels. We've got the role of digital technology that is important when it comes to young people. So they're happy about something that's more chaotic. They accept chaos. Former empires were used to chaos. There were confines. You know, you couldn't control everything, and that didn't worry people. So from my point of view, in countries like France, but also Morocco and elsewhere in Africa, there's this brilliant opportunity with digital technology to work in a more distributed manner. And this means, you know, trusting decentralized organizations. Is there some kind of barrier when it comes to financing, though? You know, if you're decentralizing and not having some kind of a center that you refer to. So it's a political combat that has to be led. So there's the question of young people who are not necessarily used to a centralized system, who are very comfortable when it's decentralized. And there's an exceptional opportunity for European countries and for us in Africa, and that is, first of all, agriculture and food safety. And you don't have agriculture in big cities, do you? You have agriculture in an area. And then there's energy, solar energy, solar power that takes up a lot of space, or wind power. Or maybe the benefits need to be localized so that there isn't a rejection, so that, then these energies are not seen like offshore industries that are drawing benefits from the centers. So then there's the question of autonomy. You need a strategic autonomy. This is what we're seeing with the recent geopolitical developments. That seems to be essential. And then a fundamental advantage of local areas. And the last point to conclude concerns the role of universities. There again, that ties in with what we're saying today. Universities are part of an innovation economy, a distributed economy. They are essential stakeholders of local areas wherever they are, and they are spread out across countries. They're essential stakeholders with the third sector, with civil society, and they help with integration. No, it's about providing top quality students for the world market, but we need, of course, universities to fulfill local needs as well. You know, your income comes from a whole career, but what you need in a local area is based on perhaps different criteria. Thank you, Karim. So any reactions from the other speakers? I'd just like to come back to what Karim was saying. He underlined a very important element, which is the importance of agriculture in the balance of local areas. In France, we've gone from 1.5 million to less than 400,000 today. Nobody talks about them, and yet it's the biggest, retirement scheme, the biggest problem that we have. Agricultural activity is a huge topic. Thank you. But we do have technological progress in agriculture. So farmers don't produce the same amounts today. So societies want organic agriculture. We have to keep that in mind. And we're not talking very much about integration. Notably following COVID, we weren't able to produce masks because it wasn't profitable. It's not profitable. So we need to think about value streams, value chains in countries. Mrs. Lagarde was talking about friendshoring with the countries where there are friendships. But the global geopolitical context is a fantastic opportunity for local areas. To help with building greater strategic autonomy based on interdependence. And that interdependence needs to be thought about in the countries themselves. It's not just about thinking at European level or global level. Yes, Stéphane, what about you? Yes, I would like to react because I think our ideas are similar. And I'm optimistic. I think that there's a huge opportunity today. Never local areas have been so attractive for, people who are working. They can work from home, they can work in the sunshine, here in Aix. There's a very positive view, perhaps rather much based on cliches of local areas, but it is an opportunity. Especially when we're seeing massive investment in order to change fundamental aspects of our infrastructure. So I think it's a very positive opportunity. So what about the state in all of this? I think the state has things that it should be doing. It needs to deploy the right infrastructures, notably digital and transport infrastructure, so that there's the right foundation, so that people can then invest in these local areas. The state needs to work on the efficiency of its services, not necessarily to continue the way it is. We know that the public service, the digital public service, is not yet fully developed. We saw this in the health crisis. Fortunately, there was Dr. Lib for managing vaccination. So perhaps it's not all up to the state, but perhaps it can organize better public services, local services. And I think that when we talk about decentralization, there's a lot of ambiguity here because, we've got a big problem. There are lots of different layers, lots of regulations. So it's perhaps decentralized, but it's also simplified. It's about simplifying local area governance. And I think there's a lot to be gained from that. So 3 quick words, because then I want to open up the discussion to the floor. Yes, very quickly, just to echo what Stéphane and Karim have said. Yes, local areas have never been so attractive. So people are looking for meaning. They were looking for meaning after COVID. And as Karim says, we're looking at distributed architectures that mean that we can work very efficiently. There are people leaving, and yet leaving cities, for example, but to illustrate what Stéphane was saying. So we've got all of these administrative levels. So sometimes it takes a year and a half for a company to find a site to set up shop in. It's impossible to find industrial sites sometimes. And this was the case of one company, and that's reality. And it's a reflection of all of the different administrative levels and the blockage points. Sophie, yes, I wanted to come back to the theme of governance and the idea of relocation in local areas. And another very concrete example, today we've set up an investment fund with the Banque des Territoires and the Crédit Agricole to build in local areas, to build people for isolated older people who can come back into the center of the borough, for example, and share a caregiver and home help and live together. So it's very simple, the idea. We have an enormous number of requests, municipalities who are saying, this is what we need, and we're happy to be able to invest in our village. The problem is that we need authorization from the county council to authorize the sharing of the home help, for example. And we find ourselves in absolutely mad situations. The municipalities want this to happen, but the county is saying, no, that's not exactly the way it has to be. So things last, so they go on forever and ever, and the investments are blocked in the meantime. So it would be good to go to the end of things. We need to give our local areas, and of course it depends on their activities, but it's all very local. They need to have a real ability to control and coordinate. This is what we see in big cities, and that's what makes the difference in big cities. Laurent? So just to follow on from what she said, Stéphane, one of the key success factors is reindustrialization. We need to succeed with reindustrializing France. In 2021, there were 45 reshoring operations for French companies, and this is something that was tending to disappear. So there is food for thought here, and public policies need to follow this. Okay, I would now like to open up the debate to the room. So there's a question from the gentleman here in blue. Please use a roving microphone. So, yes, let's just wait for the microphone, please. I just want to give you the point of view of an elected official. I've never heard you say elected official, but we're here to give you the view of local areas. So I agree with everything that's been said, but we all need to work together. And the new aspect is that we're beginning a sobriety period. And I haven't heard you talk about sobriety. We talked about financing to begin with, and sobriety is going to help us to face up to our financial problems. We can no longer just keep building and building. We need to respect environmental requirements, but we need to focus on sobriety. It's essential, especially when it comes to agriculture, and it goes hand in hand with changes to behavior. Very clearly, the reasoning is based on pooling. We can see this with the Française des Jeux, where local services are being pooled because the post office can't do everything, and post offices are being closed. Today, people's expectations are based on multiple uses. So in terms of habitat as well, in terms of mobility, in all fields, we need cars, but also we need electric bicycles, we need trams, we need interoperability. And the third aspect relates to the right scale. It's not the metropolitan scale, it's not the rural scale. It depends on the local area. And we all need to work together. We're all working in our silos. We need to change our methods. We need to be agile. Yes, there are different administrative levels, but we've got to trust each other. We've got to say to ourselves, okay, let's bring everybody together along with the local elected officials, because we're voted in. That's what local democracy is about. But at a given point in time, everybody needs to be a winner from this strategy. We need to imagine together and serve all of the interests out there. COVID has made us go very quickly, and we can no longer wait for things to change. So agility is not the word that comes to mind when I think of my country that has adopted me, so France. Marie-Ange, would you like to say something? So I've been thinking about elected officials over the course of the debate. So 3 points here I'd like to share. And I'm talking as an operator, a user, a citizen. Administrative volatility in France adds to all of these different levels that we've been talking about. So changes to skills, changes to scopes of responsibility for conurbations. How you share things out is a source of complexity for citizens, but also for those in charge, because the objective is always to do better, to find local areas, to make sure that what we do administratively is consistent in relation to a local area. We've got to look at changes, sizes of regions, the weakening of local councils, local areas. So that's the first point. The second point that I'd like to bring up is also important. We look at the idea of eco-financing, eco-construction, and getting around the table to talk about this with local authorities, talking about rates, tickets being sold by local authorities in a very fluid way without any seams for citizens. But we still have our work cut out ahead of us. We need to get local authorities to converge around this. So elected officials are key players. But we're doing things slowly in our democracy. Digital technology is helping us a lot. It's speeding things up. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in just a moment. Stéphane would like to say something. But all of the advantages that we've seen, there have been opportunities thanks to COVID, which is rather paradoxical. It's speeded up a certain number of trends. And we need to continue to capitalize on those. So we're going to take other questions. Yes, sobriety, that's a very important question. Land sobriety, especially in large metropolitan areas. It's an opportunity for developing medium-sized cities or small cities. We need to have dialogue. We need to focus on the right scales, and we need to think about mobility. So it's at regional level that you have the right skills. That's why we need to have the dialogue about transport, what needs to be done, especially fast, efficient train lines between cities. Thank you, Laurent. We had a question somewhere else in the room. Yes, hello. I'm a director of a company. I have a question about how companies can collaborate to strengthen local actions. We talk lots about commuting, but what about transport for older people? Mobility is key for them, especially when we talk about health problems and aging populations. So how can we set up collaboration? What kind of new uses can we have for a private network? What are the solutions that can be provided? And, lots of other questions like this. How, at the end of the day, can we work at a local area level between companies in order to improve this situation? Thank you. Sophie. I'd like to answer this question. It's very interesting. Let me tell you about an initiative that took place during the Yellow Vest movement. We have a group of 35 companies representing 12% of employment in France, all sectors included. So before we decided to work at a local authority level. So the idea, it's what you were saying. The idea was to say, okay, let's pool our efforts, let's pool our actions when it comes to recruitment. So we do pooled recruitment actions in terms of access to essential services as well, or in terms of purchasing, inclusive local purchasing. So it's quite young, this group, this collective. It was launched in 2018, but we gave ourselves a first objective in terms of promoting apprenticeships, providing access to banking services, and access to digital services or food-related services. I believe in these corporate dynamics. And sorry, we didn't talk about elected officials when we talked about governance. Obviously, it all depends on elected officials. They provide us with the personal dynamic. And it's only a democratic elected official who has the right legitimacy to do this. Thank you, Stéphane. I'm going to quickly answer the two previous speakers. So with respect to elected officials, yes, of course. Moreover, we work a lot with elected officials at the Française des Jeux, where sometimes the last local company in a local area, we work with tobacco shops and shops selling the papers. So it's critical for local areas to be able to do this. And the second example that relates to local officials and the way we cooperate, how lots of people cooperate together, lots of local officials and companies and the foundation work together. So the projects come from the local area. They come from associations often who have created for saving, so associations that have been created for saving monuments, for example. Then they work with local officials. And my co-financier is the region, is the council, the local county council. So these are projects where we learn to work together. So we start from the local area and we work efficiently together, because it's much easier to restore monuments this way than the way we went about things in the past. So coming back to your question, collaboration between companies, we already do this to a certain extent. We do this through our network. It's a kind of a local area platform linked to an infrastructure which is based on powerful technology that can process lots of different transactions and provide lots of different services. So, it's about pooling. The post office is not with us, but, where, maybe we could do more. So there are payment services which are going to be opened up. so that we can offer payment services for paying bills, so paying big transport bills, or, I don't know, digital energy checks maybe. So that's what we're focusing on, using these platforms as part of intercompany cooperation. It works very well. Gregoire, you have 30 seconds. Yes, just to answer the gentleman who talked about cooperation with elected officials. Obviously, that is essential. But, you know, we've worked for 5 years with local authorities. There have been 3 changes of mayor, 3 changes of prefect, and for an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to manage that kind of thing, because now, with respect to the challenge of cooperation, in France, we have tended to think that things come from the top. What I can share with you is that every time we're in an area where there's a high density, there is an ecosystem of interactions that is built up between different stakeholders. And the more there are industrial companies in a local area, the better it works. It's very efficient, and it creates a virtuous circle. I think that one of the challenges, therefore, is to create this virtuous circle, starting with the bottom. Thank you. Now, we really must stop there. Thank you to all of the speakers, and thank you to the audience.